Hi again.
Hi.
Hi. Yes, you're
Does
in
it
the
sound
middle of it
okay?
right now.
I'm trying a new microphone. Does it sound okay?
Yeah, it sounds great. Yeah,
Shiny.
yeah. So great that you are joining us again today
Yes,
for
I
the
have to
second
move over
time.
here.
Yeah.
I'm learning about your three. I see we have three people in a row. There we go. I'll move my camera. That was a great presentation. We have a lot of talented people here on Azure Thursday, don't we?
Yeah, we do. Yeah, a lot of talented people. Yeah, we had two great sessions again this evening. Yeah, yeah, we
Cool.
did.
Well, now the pressure's on.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. You really have to perform and you have to deliver. Yeah.
Lower your expectations now, my friends.
So
How do we
you were
get comments? If people have questions, how do those questions come in?
They come in the chat on the website, and we will note them, and we normally will ask them at the end of each session.
I would love it if you interrupted me.
Yeah.
I think one of the fun things about events like Azure Thursday that are live is that if I just give a presentation, then it's really just a YouTube, and then it's just me talking at someone. But if there's a question that comes in, it's really exciting to have someone say, "Oh, Hank, slow down, Scott. Let's talk about that right there." I want to hear. So feel free to interrupt. I will watch the live chat as well if I see anybody. So it's much more fun, I think, when we have interaction. So I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah. Okay. Let's do that. There is a bit of a lag between us and the live session, about 30 seconds or something like that. So
Okay. Good to know.
I will do my best to interfere your presentation when there is a
I
question.
would love it if you would interfere with my presentation.
Okay, I will. So you were with us in July, and you talked about the migration of your blog. You were basically still in the middle of migrating that blog in that time, right? And now you're back, and now your blog is finished and migrated, right?
Yes. Now,
And
certainly I haven't been working on that full time, but for those who may have missed the story, the idea, people are asking about my glasses. This is my old man glasses. I'm seeing in the chat there. This is when you see people doing this, and then when they get their phone, they get to go and they go far away from the phone. These are my reading glasses. I just feel more comfortable, I think, today. My blog has been sitting on real metal. All this time I've been talking about Azure and talking about the cloud and doing all kinds of things in the cloud, but my blog has been around since 2001, 2002, and it was sitting not on a virtual machine, it was sitting on physical metal. And it's not that I meant it to stay there for almost 20 years, it's just one of those things that happens. And I realized that that's a thing that I think happens to all of us, is we have a legacy system and it works just fine, and we don't want to piss it off, so we just don't do anything. We just let it sit there. And then a year goes by and a year goes by, and the next thing you know, you go, is that system still running on that computer under Anna's desk? We should probably do something about that, right? It's the very definition of lift and shift, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, and you did it.
Well, so it was harder than I thought, because I think with all legacy systems, there's layers, right? So it was on a physical machine. It was not on a virtual machine. And this is unfortunate because I thought for many years that it was actually on a virtual machine. And that was a miscommunication with my hoster, which I think is something we can also relate to a little bit. I thought that it was running on a virtual machine, and I called them and I said, hey, the disk is full. It's a 30 gig disk, only 30 gigs. And I had no space, and my blog was going down every few weeks because of log files.
Okay.
So I said, hey, could you expand the disk? And they said, oh, we thought this is on a real disk, like it's on spinning rust. And that's such an interesting thing that I think people who have been born on the cloud forget that there are still hard drives out there that spin that you can listen to. So that means that you could actually visit my blog on your phone, maybe hit refresh. And if you were in the same room as the host, you could listen to it and go, and hear the spinning rust, right? With the cloud, of course, we can't do that. We can't visit that machine because it's actually distributed. So that was an issue. Like, how do I get it off the physical machine? It hadn't been deployed in a couple of years. It ran on Windows. It ran on Windows Server 2008. So we're on a 13-year-old operating system, 20-year-old blog software on a physical machine. So it was really a process. So I think we can have a chat here like we are, which is quite nice. And I'll show you how I did it and what was involved, because there's URLs that I don't want to break. There's DNS issues to think about. There's getting off of Windows 2008. There's SSL issues and security issues, because I want to make sure my certificates are all TLS. And doing it in such a way that no one noticed it. And I don't think anyone noticed that I did this. And then doing what's called a scream test. Are you familiar with that term, a scream test?
No, not really.
That's when you turn a system off that you're not sure anyone uses, and you wait to see if anyone screams.
Okay.
So I got the whole thing set up. I moved Hanselman.com, Hanselman.com/blog, and Hansel Minutes, my podcast, all over. And I wasn't sure that I hadn't removed, did I remove all of the dependencies on the existing system? So I had to call the hoster and say, would you please shut off that computer? I don't want you to disable it. I don't want you to delete it. I don't want you to cancel my account. Just turn it off. And I'm going to wait for a few days and see if anybody screams. Right? Okay. Did I break some CSS? Did I ruin, was there a hard-coded IP address somewhere? Like, was there any subsystem that was assuming something? I wasn't really sure that I was fully off the system. And scream tests are a really great way to find out whether or not you even need to move the legacy system. But I did, of course.
Okay, great. And now you are going to show us how you did that, right?
Because I'll kind of walk you through the thinking about that. Yeah, so I'll share my screen then. Is that all right?
Yeah, please.
Okay. Okay, there we go. Cool. Okay, so I want to also bring up Notepad that I will basically just going to be keeping some notes and explaining a little bit of what I was trying to do. And I'm not saying that this is perfect, and you did point out that I spoke to you a little bit about this 6 months ago. So why did it take so long? It's because I was doing it an hour here and an hour there. Okay, so let's pretend that Hanselman.com and the Hanselman company is an actual thing. It's not, it's just me. But that's the other thing that's exciting about the cloud, is that you feel like you have an entire IT department. Like, I feel like I'm a dozen people and I have this whole system now, but it's just me. And that's such a joy to have multiple websites deploying on the regular, to having Azure Devops and GitHub Actions and testing, built-in container. All of this stuff would have taken a half dozen people and a whole team, but it's just me. And that's one of the great things about the cloud. So Hanselman.com, Hanselman.com/blog, and then Hansel Minutes. Those are the 3 websites that make up the Hanselman family of websites. So if we go to Hanselman.com, this is my brochureware website. It's the home page. It has the list of the last blog posts. It has places that I'm going to speak at, which I haven't updated for this year yet, links to books. It's also a series of mini sites, so like my about page and my speaking page and my podcast page. But it is not a complicated site. It's a pretty straightforward site. It is separate, though, from Hanselman.com/blog, which is a whole app. And Hanselman.com/blog has a ton of content going back 18 years. So if we pick a year and then start scrolling, you can see that I kind of pretty consistently blog every Tuesday and Thursday, basically twice a week for 20 years. And I don't want to lose any of that content. I also don't want to break any URLs. There's the regular blog URLs. But if we look, for example, at my tools list, I also have some URLs that are unusual or custom. So let me fix my Zoom it here. Here we go. So here's an example of a custom URL, which isn't a site. If you go to Hanselman.com/tools, It's like a bit.ly, but it's not a bit.ly. It's just a custom redirect. There's also historical URLs. And by historical, I mean when my blog in 2002 used things like permalink.aspx GUID equals something, 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 like really, really, really old URLs. I don't want to break any of those either. There was the issue that Hanselman.com was written on ASP.NET and an older version of that. So you might go and find, some blog title.aspx. I complicated things by wanting to make this URL format something more modern. I wanted to go from what's called Pascal casing to kebab casing. And that's totally out of scope of moving to Azure, but it overcomplicated things for me, which is something to think about. Plus, again, I was on an older version of Windows Server, so I even had challenges with like TLS and things like that. So the first thing I wanted to do was get the Brochureware website running. And that was written in ASP.NET and MVC. So if I come out here to the command line, I'm using the Windows terminal, and I recently made it look pretty with the Oh My Posh, and I've written about this on my blog. So here I've got the source code for Hanselman.com, and I wrote this in .NET and just moved it to .NET Core. So I should be able to just say .NET Build, and you can see that it's now running on .NET 5, which of course we know is cross-platform, and that allows me to run it on Linux. So this was pretty straightforward. This was a simple website that I made in .NET, and because it was not doing anything complicated, moving it over to .NET Core was fairly trivial. Where things got interesting were the fact that I was using IIS on Windows Server 2008. Okay, so 12-year-old website on IIS 7. IIS 7 has a thing called Iis Rewrite Rules that I think those of us of a certain age are familiar with, and those are done in XML. If there is no IIS, if I go from IIS 7 to Linux on Azure rather, app service, and I use containers, what's going to happen to all of these rewrite rules? What's going to happen to that? Well, fortunately, .NET Core includes middleware that is right here. Add IIS URL rewrite. And that's really powerful. That's a huge bridge. People who are doing legacy work on IIS, who are familiar with this XML file, should really take a moment to think about that. That was the fundamental trick that allowed me to get off of IIS, because I could read in, I could ingress that file as a file format without using IIS. So if we look at the file, what's going on here? Remember I had that /tools? I've been doing my tools list for 15 years. I wanted to make it so none of those URLs broke. So I need redirects. So I filled this with redirects, as well as a couple of other cool features, and was able to not have to convert that. I just ingressed, I just sucked that file in directly. Oh, I also have a newsletter. That's another thing. That's another redirect to think about. So being able to bring that file in was huge. Another thing that I've been doing, which is a little bit clever, I think, is sometimes people steal my content. Sometimes people will reblog my content, and that really bothers me. So I made this PNG file that says if you're seeing this image, you've stolen my blog. And then I have a list of websites that have stolen my blog and reblogged it. So here in the IIS rewrite.xml, if someone requests a picture from me from one of these evil people, they will end up with my text but with all of the images replaced saying that they're evil. And that has discouraged people. That was all done again in Iis many, many years ago, and I've written about that on my blog. You can go and search for it. That all worked when I sucked in that Iis URL rewrite, which is really powerful. Now, if we go over to Azure, and let's do it like this. Let's go into Azure from here. And go to our app services and find the blog. And I'm going to back out and show you the app service plan. Okay, so I have a couple of app service plans. Here's my Linux app service plan. And I wanted to move to Linux from Windows because it's about 30% cheaper. And that was super helpful. Being able to see a cheaper experience was important to me. And right now I've got 3 apps on app service. I know that the folks who watch Azure Thursday probably know this, but it's an important reminder. You don't have to have one website per app service plan. It's very expensive to do that. In my opinion, we should make these machines work as hard as possible. If we look here, I'm using about 50% of my memory, but only 10% of my CPU. This app service plan, I should probably either make it smaller or I should put more stuff in it. I should make it work harder. This is not like a regular virtual machine. We want these things to work as hard as possible so that we don't have to pay any money. If I click on that, you can see that I'm running my website, my blog, and the podcast all now in one app service plan. Now, this is based on Linux. Now, I have about 20 or 30 other sites. I wanted to save money on those. 6 of them live in a Windows app service plan that has really high memory and really low CPU. That's because I do really aggressive caching. One of the things about Azure that I think people also don't realize is that they give you tons of memory. Maybe the CPU isn't as fast, maybe the disk isn't as fast, but memory on Azure is cheap. So I architected my sites to cache huge amounts of information, which is super helpful. Again, if you have any questions, I would encourage you to ask them in the chat if I'm going too fast or too slow or you want more information. While I was doing this, it wasn't just moving the Hanselman family of things, but I've also got, I think, 19 other small websites. These small websites are like my kids' blog and little brochureware websites like keysleft.com, which is how many keystrokes do you have left in your hands before you die, and babysmash.com, which is a game that I wrote for kids. All these websites, I want them in the cloud, I want them to be HTTPS, I want them to be in GitHub, and I want them to auto-deploy. All of these sites I want in Azure as well. So what I ended up doing was using Azure static sites, Azure static web apps. So I moved, oh, you got a question?
Yeah, I have a question because there are a lot of products that you can choose from when you decide to create a web application. And you've chosen the app service plan, so you've chosen web apps and Linux web apps. And you say that's because of costs. Why haven't you chosen for containers in this case?
That's a great question. So if you go and say app service, make an app service plan, there's Windows app service, Linux app service, and then Linux for containers, right? Mm-hmm. It turns out that the Linux app service on Azure uses containers anyway, whether you use them or not. So when you make a Linux web app, it's going to go and use a container. It's going to spin up Docker. It's going to pick the container for you, and it will be used either way. So the only difference between Linux web apps and Linux web apps for containers is, do you care enough to own the container image, or do you want them to own the container image?
Fair. That's fair.
Right?
Yeah.
I may be wrong, so correct me if I'm wrong. But so then the idea is if I go into the app service and I pick, well, .NET 5, do I want to be responsible for keeping .NET 5 updated, thereby keeping my container layers updated, or do I want to let them do it? It's basically how platform as a service do I want it to be? Do I want it to be very platform as a service or just a little bit platform as a service?
Okay, yeah, good decision then in that case. Thanks.
Yeah. Now, if I was more of a container person, this is a great question, and thank you for having it. If I was more containery, and I'll show you my container files, so they do have Docker files, I would have insisted on it because if I wanted, I would want control. So if we switch back to my machine here for a second, and I go back to Hansel Minutes, which is the podcast site, Hansel Minutes. I actually have a Docker file. I'll bring it. Actually, let me open it with VS Code. That'll be nicer. So that Docker file I actually used for development, but I didn't feel strongly about doing it for deployment, because here, I build in .NET 5. I copy the code in, including my tests, and it's a multi-stage Docker file. I'm actually doing the build inside the container. I'm doing the test inside the container, the publish inside the container, and then the final layer is the runtime one. But I'm doing in my actual Azure Devops build, which I'll show you in a little bit, I'm doing a self-contained build, which means I include ASP.NET along for the ride. So I'm in a situation here where I could use these two layers here, this layer rather, as my final ultimate deployment one. But because they were using them already and I did a self-contained build, I didn't think it was necessary. It also would have meant I would need to think about this stuff. And I really like being able to go into app services, Hanselman, it's Linux, configuration, and under general settings, I selfishly like this. All I'm really doing by picking that is picking a container. So it's an issue of, do I want to control my container indirectly, or do I want to control my container absolutely directly? Here I have choice. So Alex in the chat is asking, what app service plan do I use? I'm using the standard Linux one, which if I go into Hanselman, it's core Linux, and we go and look at our log. Let's see if it's actually turned on. Let's try app service logs. Log stream. Can never remember where the logs are. They're in 16 different places. Let's see if it'll let us connect. Then you'll see the Docker images that are spinning up in the background. Martin is asking, why did I choose to build and test within the container instead of GitHub Actions? I do both. That's a great question. So this right here, if I were to go and say Docker test, notice that I have test.ps1. So I can test in Windows here. I can test in Linux in a Docker container. And I can check in DevOps. So I have a lot of flexibility here. I can do whatever I want. I've set this up in such a way that here I can build and test in Docker, which I'm doing right now. I can test in Windows. And if we go over to DevOps, or certainly GitHub Actions, I can do the exact same thing. So when we go, actually right now, this is here my testing and my building is happening. Here's Azure DevOps. I'm using that because GitHub Actions didn't exist. If I go into the Hanselman, its website, and then go into pipelines, you can see that 6 hours ago, a pipeline ran. So I'm using Dependabot. So if we look at my GitHub repositories, Hanselman, I have pull requests coming in from Dependabot. Here's one from 6 hours ago. And then that pipeline ran over here. And within that pipeline, the testing ran as well in that job. So I could do that work here, or I can do it up here. It doesn't matter. So I don't really care whether it's on the metal or in a container or whatever. Does that answer your questions? I'm a little bit less opinionated, I think, than I could be. Like, am I all in on containers? No, I'm in on containers for when I need it. But it offers me great flexibility. Additionally, I'm always aware of when I can run in containers and when I can run on the metal. And I am kind of slightly low-key, always making sure that it runs everywhere. I want to make sure stuff runs on Windows, Linux, and containers at all times, just for future flexibility. I would be sad if I accidentally switched something over where it no longer ran in containers, or I broke it on Windows. I don't need Windows, but I like to have that flexibility. So if we look at my code and look at the Azure pipelines, on this one, we're only testing on Ubuntu and Linux when we do the build. But on my blog, I'm actually building and testing on Windows at the same time, just in case I might someday want to switch back. All right. I think I've lost my train of thought now.
Scott, could I ask you one question before you continue?
Of course, please ask your question.
So you were showing us all of the redirect stuff, right? Supporting the old URLs, and you do that using the Iis middleware.
Thank you, friend. Bye-bye. Close the door, sir.
No problem. So my question is there any dedicated Azure service that could help you get the same result without keeping all of those redirect things in your code base?
I'm sorry, let me make sure I understand this because I was distracted by my son. Are you asking me if there is a service that could get me those redirects without having to maintain that XML file?
Yeah, so without it actually being connected to your application itself.
Okay. So if you were to do a URL remap like that, that can happen at multiple layers. I'm doing it when it's already entered Azure, it's already entered the app service, and I am making it the responsibility of the application to do that work. So when the HTTP request terminates at that point, my application makes that decision, and it's making it with the Iis middleware. We are using the Iis add-on middleware it's emulating Iis. There's also an htaccess thing that can absorb htaccess. That would still, to your point, be done with the application's responsibility. I could do that as a rewrite rule using Azure Front Door. So when the HTTP call comes in and hits Hanselman.com, it's actually hitting an Azure Front Door, an AFD. And Azure Front Door is here. And if we go to the Front Door Designer, we can see I've got Hanselman.com, I've got Hanselman staging, I've got the main site and the blog, and then I have a series of routing rules. I could do routing rules and use the routing engine within Azure Front Door. However, each of these routing rules is, and I could be off $1 or $2, but it's $5 a month per rule. And I've got 30 or 40 of them. It's silly for me as a small business to spend $100 a month to maintain those URLs. Now, they've added a feature within this that is patterns to match and rules engines that I could theoretically do cheaper, but it still is not, in my opinion, Azure Front Door, while it's an amazing thing, is not great for managing dozens or certainly not hundreds of these things. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it totally does. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that the interesting thing that you've brought up, and I want to make sure that the audience understands this, is a very important concept, because what he did is he pushed back on an architectural decision. And what's significant about that architectural decision is that there's no wrong answer. There are only trade-offs. It's thinking about that stack, and that's cloud thinking. It's really thoughtful. It comes in and it hits the Azure front door. There's a moment of opportunity to do that redirect. Then where does it hit? Well, then it hits Azure App Service, and there's a moment of opportunity there. There's middleware, there's Nginx, and there's Iis, and there's whatever Azure App Service is doing. Some of it's hidden from us, some of it isn't. Then there's the application's responsibility. And then from the point of view of the pipeline within .NET Core, there's the .NET Core pipeline. So any number of opportunities to interact with and to spit back a redirect, to spit back a 302. Additionally, I could have used Cloudflare. I could have used an alternative external front door for my routing, although it wouldn't have been cleanly integrated like Azure Front Door is, because with Azure Front Door, I'm not doing redirects, I'm doing forwards, which is really, really important. Let's talk about that for just a brief second before I answer a couple of the questions from the chat. This issue here, there is Hanselman.com, which is a website. So let's look at that for just a moment here. We go to Hanselman.com. That is here. It is this site. So you look at this URL. No matter what you do, you're going to get a URL that's mywebsite.azurewebsites.net. If I visit that, it says unavailable, because I've written code in my app that says I don't want anyone to accidentally visit here. Right? This is a thing people don't ever do. You really want to think about that. You may have a version of your website that is available at azurewebsites.net, and you've just never said, I don't want it available there. I only want it available at hanselman.com. This URL will always be mywebapp.azurewebsites.net. I can't stop that, but I can reject the traffic, and I can say, no, I don't want to allow people to do that. So this is a website. That is hanselman.com. Okay. Blog is a separate website. So we go Hanselman blog, which is here. Oops, that's it. That's App Insights, pardon me. Blog. There we go. The blog also has a weird URL that I reject. I only want to be at /blogs. But this is an app. This is an app. Applications like to run at a top-level URL. So I have to think about this. What I'm doing is I'm going like this. You see? And I can't forget this piece. We have a front door that is forwarding to a top-level location here. And if we go back to AFD and we look at that routing rule here under the front door designer, there are two back-end pools, the main site and the /blog. Okay? When you hit /blog, the pattern to match is here. The back-end pool is forwarded only, not redirected. I wouldn't want to do a redirect. I'd lose my /blog, right? So then I have to acknowledge that it's not located at a one folder down, one thing down. And here's where it gets kind of weird. We go and find my code there for this particular blog, which is here. This will make sense in a second, so hang in there, friends. I think it's in, where is it? Oh, it's actually over here, I forgot. Startup. We have to configure forwarded header options. Okay, we need to make sure that the headers that Azure Front Door applies, and there's a thing that's called X forwarded for. X forwarded for. This isn't an Azure thing. This is a cloud thing. And that makes it so when I hit hanselman.com/blog/foo, that it shows up as whatever Azure Websites /flu. I don't want that /blog in here. So I have to maintain that illusion for a while, and that can be really challenging. So I walk through that process and exactly what you need to do to make sure that that happens. And there's a thing in .NET called base path. Yeah, James Vandenberg's in the application gateway. There are different ways to do this. So you have to think about this path base and deal with proxies that change or they don't change that. And you have to basically like lie to your application. So you really need to be thoughtful about that. You can often get confused when you're doing this kind of work. But what's interesting about it is that it's enabled me to go and say, there's hanselman.com, which is site 1. There's /blog, site 2, and then there's Hansel Minutes, which is site 3. I could, if I wanted to, make /podcast point to site 3, right? I could basically make that forwarded to that, and it would cost me for the price of a routing rule inside of front door. Isn't that cool? A lot of flexibility, I want to go back to a question that Javi said in the chat, which is what is Dependabot? Dependabot is, in my opinion, one of the most amazing and joyful things that GitHub has to offer. And what it is, oh, and by the way, I just noticed something. This is totally random, but I do a lot of live streams and stuff like this. So I didn't know that. I'm giving a little backstage tip here for friends who are watching. Notice how when I put my head like this, I'm looking at my monitor, but because we put my head on the left, it looks like I'm looking away from the code. When I do a video for YouTube or I think about a thing like this, I usually want to know which side I'm on. So I should have made it so I'm looking at this monitor, and then I'd be able to like point at the code. This is a stupid little thing, but it's just interesting because it's like I'm looking, why is he looking away at the code? Well, because it's on this monitor. So you could invert me, you could swap me, or you could move me to the other side, or you could flip my head and just point me in the other direction. But that's one of the little things. If you ever put on a big conference and you got a person with 3 monitors, think about, well, where are they looking and why is he looking up, So that's why I'm looking over this way. So forgive me, because the monitor's here, but it's actually over here. Okay. Dependabot is another person who is looking at my code and noticing that there's a new version of something and making a pull request. So check this out. I'm one person. I'm the only coder on this thing. And 6 hours ago, someone who's not a real person just said, hey, alt cover is a NuGet package, and it went from this version to that version. That's such a nice thing. What a convenient thing. Like if an actual human did that, I would be like, that's so nice. This is the part that gets amazing. If you open up the release notes, they actually looked at the releases and did a diff, and they're listing what changed. If that was a human, you'd be like, wow, you went above and beyond. That was so nice. And the actual list of commits between these 2 versions. So I can go now and click on these and see what changed. And then, because I've set this up with Azure Devops, this got built. Remember, if I went back over to Azure Devops, that pipeline ran. So I can see if the tests passed for this thing. So look at that. Someone, again, a bot, but one of my many employees here at Hanselman Incorporated, updated thing, did a pull request, tested it. I have 4 that are skipped. That's actually 100%. This is because these 4 run in Selenium, and I don't have Selenium working yet. So, did you flip me? You're awesome. Was that you? See, now I can look over here and see how natural it is. Look at that. Such a good, this is why I love Azure Thursday, so professional. So now all tests have passed and all I have to do is say merge. So look at this. If I go back up to pull requests, these are all bumps, and I can either close them or not close them. Dependabot is a joy. And if you, as with all programmers, just put the word Hanselman in front of all of your Google queries, you just say Hanselman and then whatever, just write Hanselman Dependabot, then I've got a blog post about that. So I walk exactly like why it's amazing and why it's a joy and why you should check it out. It's super amazing. That's what Dependabot is. It's great. I love it.
I have another question about this.
Oh, what do you got?
This scares me, man. Are you just accepting these pull requests at some point, or are you manually testing stuff in between? Because couldn't anything change in one of these packages that it's automatically updating for you and break your everything?
Okay, this is a great question. So let's think about this for a second. This is the Hanselman company, right? We have offices all over the world and Starbucks worldwide, thousands of employees, basically just me and a bunch of bots. If we were a bunch of humans, then are you saying that a human would notice this and a human would manually test that? Well, what would that human do? Well, they would probably have to go and find out what changed between the versions and then look at those things and then probably run some tests. Well, I did run some tests. It's automatic. So all the boring human stuff happened. I ran all the tests. The site still works. I know the commits. Now, the only thing that I could do as a human now is basically read this code. But if I fundamentally trust my tests, now I realize that it's just a brochureware website and 23 tests isn't a lot, but those tests check to make sure URLs didn't break, that the site still compiles, that the site still runs. These are real tests. This isn't just like unit tests. I have integration tests in here as well. I can see that the duration of the run went up by 6 seconds. So maybe there's a problem, like a perf regression. But 80 or 90% of the work has already been done. The boring work's been done. So then the real question you're asking is, do I blindly merge this? It depends. It depends on how scary it is. I would blindly merge that because it's a code coverage tool. It's not used at runtime, and it's a minor version. I would not blindly do 2 major versions of a UI portion.
Right.
Does that make sense? I would happily do that. It's a minor build of a Microsoft thing. So yes and no, use good sense. But think about the immense amount of work here. What a joy this is that 10 pull requests have come in. And I need to do this work anyway. Let the bots work for you. And this is what I think is so great about automation and the cloud, is that not only do I get to be a worldwide international company that's so fancy here at Hanselman Incorporated, but I also, like this is I always like to do this, by the way. I like to show people this. This is how I feel like I'm a big fancy company. Because you ever like walk into like a fancy company and they have like a TV in the lobby with like a picture of the world with pins of all their offices. Like if you want to be a fancy company too, you just buy a cheap TV and you mount it on your wall, right? And then just like have the TV up there and put this dashboard there. Azure App Service does this for you. It shows me my load times, my browser exceptions, I got a CPU spike. A whole team would have done that. So I have all the flexibility on the runtime side, all the flexibility on the build side, and all the flexibility on the code side. This is what we talk about when we say developer productivity. It means I don't have to worry about the boring crap. Does that answer your question? I don't mean to get off like on a lecture here, but I want people to be excited about this. This is freaking exciting. If you trust your tests, and this is important, if I had, let's say I had 200 tests. Let's say I went here, and this said 230. And then you just said, which was a great question, do you trust that? I would say, dude, I have 230 tests. I trust it. If I had 2,300 tests, if I was a real company, the more tests I have, yeah, I'd probably blindly do these things. Or at least I'd spend 20 minutes looking at them. It wouldn't be like, do them all. But the tests need to represent reality. And if the tests pass, it should work. Oh, and then Alex
Awesome.
is making a great point in the chat, and you can do an easy rollback. And that's another thing I want to point out, by the way, about Azure App Service as we get towards the end of our conversation here. This was huge for me. Remember, I was running on spinning Rust. This is so important. I mean, seriously, snapshots and backups. Having snapshots and backups, you know, the oh shoot button that you can just go, oh shoot, and then click it and then go back. Yeah. No, Alex is saying the bot will not overrule you. No, absolutely not. So deployments are up to me. So here's the last time I deployed. Even though those builds happened, they have not been deployed because a build, which has occurred in a build pipeline. Here's all of my recent pipeline runs, right? Here's the runs. These are all the builds, is not a release. Releases are going to be manual. Good questions. I think I have a meeting now, so I'm at the end of my time. I hope this was helpful.
Yeah, this was fun.
I'm glad.
Yeah, this was really great. Yeah, thank you.
Cool.
You've shown us that we really have some great talent on the Azure Thursday, right?
I am just happy to be one of the 3 wonderful talks today, and I appreciate everyone hanging out with us. And yeah, follow me on Twitter and TikTok. Hey, I started a TikTok because the young people, they love the TikTok. So I'm a huge TikTok star now. I've been on there for almost a day.
Wow. Wow. And do we have a lot of followers already?
So true story. Yesterday, while America burned, I shut off my Twitter because it was stressing me out. So I went and I made a TikTok because that's what you do when your country's in crisis. And I have 13,000 followers in one day on TikTok. Wow. I think it's my dancing that is so nice. So you should definitely follow me on TikTok.
Okay, we will. Thanks again, Scott.
Cool. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you. Bye-bye. Have a great day.
Bye.
So we're at the end of the evening. We had 3 great talks. So a lot of interesting stuff that they've shown us. So I really want to thank all 3 of the speakers for that great session. And at last, I also want to thank a huge thank to our sign language interpreters. They did a great job tonight as well. Again, they always do a great job for us. So thank you all for watching. We will post these videos on our YouTube channel as well. So if you want to see them or watch them again or later on, you can go to our YouTube channel and watch them over there. So thanks a lot. Have a great evening, and we'll see you next month. Bye-bye.
Bye.